My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. Hello, welcome to the Sales Lab. Today is part one of a three-part discussion with Steve Topel from Marsh McLennan. And we're going to talk a little bit about commercial insurance, something that I bet you don't know much about, mysterious world. Talk a lot about young salespeople, mentorship, development, different career stages. Hope you get something out of it. And so I think a lot of people, when they think about insurance, have a very specific thing that comes to mind. They think of a gecko, or they think of, Flo, or whichever, whoever annoys them the most or the least in these increasingly ridiculous commercials.
Right.
And people are going to be tempted to think, okay, you're in insurance. That must be, you're like a State Farm agent. That's not at all what we're talking about. So what are we talking about? Give us some parameters so we know what the context is.
Well, like you say, I always, when I ever go into speaking engagements, I always play the game about who can identify the mascot, right? Because they're omnipresent all over television, especially in sporting events. And I think most people's view of insurance is either they think about life insurance salespeople, they think about State Farm, Allstate, et cetera, or the various mascots in the commercials that you see. And none of that is the part of the business we're in. We don't tend to advertise. There isn't television commercials for organizations like Marsh McLennan Agency. But what we do is we function in four general areas. My organization, specifically Marsh McLennan Agency, focuses on the upper middle marketplace. Now, everybody defines that differently, but these are going to be largely privately held, closely controlled companies or private equity-owned companies, maybe some small public companies. And we are providing their protection to their physical assets, protection from liabilities from third parties, protection from worker injury, as well as providing employee benefits, health insurance, disability, life insurance to the workforce that our clients have. So we're in the business of, like I said, four different businesses: property casualty insurance, employee benefits insurance and product, high net worth personal insurance products. So not the gecko or the progressive, but really, the people who have all the toys and the large mansions and that kind of exposure. And then retirement, 401k plans for our clients. So Marsh McLennan Agency plays in all four of those businesses. But I would say that the defining thing is more about buying pattern. Our clients tend to be more entrepreneurial. They're companies that have complex needs and limited resources. So they don't have a professional buyer of insurance protections. And so therefore, they need to have a relationship with an insurance broker who becomes their consultant and helps to identify where they have exposures to loss and helps to facilitate. In a sense, insurance is nothing more than balance sheet transfer, right? Take a risk off of our client's balance sheet and put it onto an insurance company's balance sheet because it's the most efficient, cost-effective way to transfer liability to somebody else. If there were other ways, and there are, then we do that first, right? Insurance is always the last thing we do.
Absolutely. And so would it be safe to say that, if we take a huge company, a Google or a Microsoft or somebody like that, they do this in-house? The people you're working with are people that basically need to outsource that function to you guys. They're not quite big enough to do it.
Yeah. I would characterize it slightly differently. Yes, what they're going to have, first of all, there are global corporations and they have amazingly complex needs as well. But they're going to have professionals on their team who can interact with insurance partners, and they become much more institutional buyers than they do entrepreneurial buyers. So no one ever got fired at a Fortune 1000 company for hiring our parent company, Marsh or Aon or Willis, the big three brokers. No one ever is going to get fired for doing that, right? And they have the resources and the tools to help those international Fortune 2000 publicly traded companies to deal with all their exposures. But as we know, most business out there in the world, U.S. especially, is not those companies.
Oh, yeah.
80% of our economy is literally based on smaller companies. And that's the market segment, the higher end of that market segment that we serve.
Okay. So I have a fleet of delivery trucks, a factory, a manufacturing facility. And if I call my local State Farm agent, they might be happy to chat with me, but they might not be in the best position to understand the complexity of the risk that comes with that. So I call you guys.
So yes, those state farms and all states and progressives have a small business platform. And small business is going to be, think about more mom and pop type of stuff.
Yeah.
It's the dry cleaner with 2 vans and 6 employees, right? That's more that end of the market segment. When you're talking about, let's say, a manufacturing company who has 150 employees, who has 6 long haul trucks, and who has revenues of $20 million plus or something like that, that's probably more traditional middle market type of needs. And so typically it's a CFO or a chief operating officer, or even the business owner, who's going to be the one dealing with the insurance purchases. And on the employee benefit side, it's going to be if they have a human resource leader, it's going to be that person probably along with the CFO. So the relationships that companies like I have, run, are with C-suite executives, right? That's our entree point. That's who our relationships are with. And that's what we focus on, being an extension to their leadership team, because they need that.
Absolutely. So you mentioned before we perhaps actually formally started that this industry is a little bit monochromatic, a little bit aged. And it's fascinating to me because it's from a young person, coming out of college or under 25, trying to figure out where they want to build their career. This is probably not anywhere on their radar. They look at tech. They find these sexy products that they see commercials for, and unless you show up to campus or at some event and say, hey, we have this opportunity, they might go their entire lives without knowing that this is a possibility. So how does that work?
So it's funny because we joke a lot that either you fall into insurance, you bump into it, and that's my story. I bumped into it. You come from a family that's in it. So most young people, whether they're in college or they're earlier in their careers, would never think of insurance as being very sexy. That's our fault as an industry, right? Because it is a dynamic industry that has the opportunity, for those people out there that are intellectually curious about how businesses are built and run and grow, phenomenal business. Because all day long, all we're doing is talking to business owners and executives about how they built their business, what they're worried about as they look forward, and how they're going to grow their business. That's actually, when you think about it, when you get to talk to someone and break through the cynicism about what is insurance brokerage, and even educate them on what insurance brokerage is, they all of a sudden go, oh, wow, I never heard of that before. I didn't even know that. And shame on us, because we're not doing a good job of promoting it. And I'm at the part of my career, I've been in the business 38 years. I'm at the part of my career where I'm a zealot about recruiting the next generation, because it is a fabulous business. And from a sales perspective, it's a business that has unlimited income potential. It's not one that has a territory, or, hey, let's reduce your commission schedule because you're doing great. It's an unbelievably great in the sales side of the business as far as a total meritocracy, right? You're good at what you do. You're going to earn as much money as you possibly can earn. There's no top. And then there's other careers outside of sales within the industry that are absolutely great career builders, and there is a career path to grow, make a good living, and be professionally challenged, right? And again, so the industry has done such a terrible job of promoting. And I'm trying to do that, doing this podcast and other things, right? I'm trying to be the Pied Piper to get people to look at it.
Absolutely. Well, and to me, so, my last job before going back to grad school was selling accounting services. And I love talking about selling accounting services because I think it's very easy for anyone hearing it to assume that must be the most boring thing ever. What could you possibly say about accounting services that would be interesting all day long? And the answer is, well, you don't say anything about accounting services. You talk to business owners and entrepreneurs. You find out what they're doing, why they're doing it, what led them there. You get to hear these great stories. You get to hear that, they started this business and they had this idea in their head and they're hitting a lot of obstacles. And one of those obstacles is that they don't know how to keep their books and they're spending a lot of time doing it and they don't know if they're doing it right or legally or any of these very important things. And you just help them, and so what you're describing to me, it makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. I get to go talk to people running businesses, growing businesses. And these are some of my favorite types of people. I've probably made this joke in the past, but other than, obviously the very best thing you can be as a sales professor, but after that, I think it's probably an entrepreneur, that these are the people that make the world move, and I would probably count salespeople in general as entrepreneurs. It's the same waking up in the morning and making things happen that weren't going to happen if you didn't make them happen. It's amazing that we can do that in the world. So
it's one of the few things that you have your business within a business. So you're working for a company, you're sales professional for a company, but literally you have your own, in a sense, LLC within that company. And you're building your brand and you're building your revenue base and you're building your network and you're getting rewarded for that. And that's what, I'm a sales guy through and through, even though I'm in leadership now. I've always been first and foremost what I did the first 20 years of my career, which was being a frontline insurance professional, talking with clients and prospects and centers of influence and building a business, Steve Inc., so to speak.
Yep.
And the last 18 years I've been in leadership, but I never get away from helping my frontline sales team win deals. That's what I love. If anybody asks me what's been the favorite part of my career, it's any time I was in the hunt on a deal. Yep. Anytime. Because that's what motivated me, the hunt.
Yep. Now, you mentioned that people who are in insurance fall in or they have family that are, so I think you said that you fell in, right? Can you tell us a story about that?
I bumped into it, I'll call it. Okay. So I was going to the University of Wisconsin in Madison many, many years ago, and I was an accounting major, speaking of accounting. And I was in a cost accounting class and I was struggling to get a B and I was really frustrated. And at that time, there was a library, the Memorial Library on campus, still is there. But a lot of people hung out on the first floor and study. It was more of a social study type of environment. I know if any college students are listening, they can relate to it, or people who are recent college grads. And I was kind of throwing myself around a little bit and kind of tossing stuff and kind of grunting and, kind of frustrated. And a young lady across from me shushed me, like to be quiet. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I happened to catch a glimpse of the textbook that she had, and it said Principles of Risk Management. I didn't even know what that meant. And I was out taking a break, and she happened to be out taking a break. And I approached her and said, hey, I apologize again for making too much noise. And I said, tell me what that book means, Principles of Risk Management. And she explained what being a risk management major at the University of Wisconsin was about. Now, that's a fancy way of saying risk management is the study of, transferring risk that businesses or people have to other financial means. Right. And sometimes it's focused on avoiding risk, and sometimes it's focused on transferring risk to other parties that aren't insurance companies, and blah, 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 this whole thing. Yep. Well, being impulsive like I normally was, and sometimes can be accused of being today, I went to the registrar's office the next day. I dropped my accounting major and I became a risk management major. And I thought my parents were going to kill me. Because insurance, what are you talking about? And I still didn't know anything about insurance. But what I liked was she told me that, the whole course is really about case studies. It's really about looking into businesses and figuring out how they can avoid taking on risk that they can't afford to take on. Wow, that sounds so much more interesting than cost accounting. And it was. And so from being an accounting major to a risk management major, and then it's time to look for jobs. And it happened to be a good time in the economy. So I was a risk management major, and I had all sorts of job opportunities that I could have taken with insurance companies, becoming an underwriter, working at various insurance brokers, doing different things. I really decided for myself that I don't want to be involved in jumbo huge businesses. I thought that would be kind of more boring. I wanted to be involved with the kinds of entrepreneurs that my father was. My father owned a business. and I thought it was kind of cool. I always was fascinated by how he and his friends built their businesses. And I recognized that becoming an insurance broker in the space that I was interested in would allow me to do that. And I pursued a role with a company for a couple of months, smaller company, and they hired me. And that's how I started my career as an insurance broker. So I was selling. Insurance broker, insurance salesperson, same thing, interchangeable. Yeah. Agent, same thing.
And so how did you find that transition from, being in school, learning about risk management and all of this to selling? I mean, how did you adapt to the actions and the functions of the salesperson?
Well, I'll tell you this. I thought myself of being a natural salesperson, because people think, oh, I have the gift of gab. I like to talk to people, right? You're an extrovert, so therefore you're a good salesperson, right? And which is, I'm sure you can speak to the science about that. But I went to a small company that had no training program and didn't have a clue on, and this is in the day of quote unquote the yellow pages, right? And it wasn't, we really didn't even have computers on our desk at the time. And faxing was a new technology that came into vogue. There was no training program. I was just thrown to the wild. And I learned the hard way, really hard way. It's a hard business to begin with, but I wouldn't recommend the way I learned to be the way that I would. I didn't build a program to train college graduates in my business the way I learned, but I survived. At that time in the industry, a lot of agencies being the firms, they might have had a really lousy book of business, a series of clients that were small, problematic. They didn't really care if they lost them or not. And, you would get assigned a group of those accounts.
Oh, of course.
And you get your teeth kicked in on those accounts. And at the same time, you're prospecting and trying to develop new business opportunities, getting your teeth kicked in that way. So fortunately, I was a survivor. Fortunately, I started to thrive. And this business is a little bit like a hockey stick. If you think of a hockey stick, it's kind of like flatline, maybe drops a little bit. But then you have this kind of rocket upward trajectory.
It's moving, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not to say you don't have necessarily a year that's not as good as a previous year, but it's kind of an upward trajectory at that point. So I just happened to be fortunate, and I was fortunate to have a couple of mentors that really made a difference in my career development and helped me and coached me and, practiced with me and critiqued me and kicked me in the butt when I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing and taught me how to behave in meetings. And as I think, everybody needs anyway, right? You need mentors, you need coaches, you need people to help you get started. And so, it just started to click. And I love it.
What were some of the key lessons that you learned during those first few years? And how did you learn them?
So one of the key lessons I learned, so I had a mentor of the World War II generation. So that person, if they were alive today, would be 100 plus, 90s for sure, right? But at the time, this is a person in their 60s, very, very technical in the industry, really good in the industry. And I just adored this guy. He even took me to shoe stores to buy the right shoes for my suits. We were all wearing suits back then. This is kind of in, if anybody, the Mad Men days, in the sense people smoking in the office and there were people drinking at lunch, right? It was a little bit of an eye-opening kind of time in business in the early 80s. So Roger was his name, and Roger was an amazing mentor to me. I love the man. And the hard lesson I learned was I'm not him. I tried to be him. And people looked at me and said, you're a 23, 24, 25 something year old guy. Why are you imitating him? And it was a lesson learned that I needed to take the best of what Roger did and then figure out how to put it in my own style and then take the best. I think of it like Frankenstein's monster, right? You have to take body parts and assemble them. And I had a lot of experiences where I would see someone do something and I would say, oh, I really like that. Now I had to figure out how to make it my own, not make it theirs. And then I would see stuff that I didn't like. And I would say like, oh, I need to figure out how not to make sure I don't do that. So that was to me the biggest lesson I learned, is like, I have to be myself.
Yeah.
And I have to take these lessons that I'm getting and figure out how to put them and make them Steve Topel-like, not Roger-like,
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good one. I mean, I've heard a lot of people, and I think I've been in this boat myself as well, say, I want to be the next plug in somebody's name, the big hero at your company, the big name in your industry, a famous person that does what you do. You don't get to be that. There is no that. You're thinking in the past rather than in the future.
So Roger said to me at one point, he sat me down after this client complained to Roger about me. And Roger said, "Hey, Steve, your job is to be the next Steve Topel, not to be the next Roger." And it was like, oh, I see. I talked to my team today because they're young, right? I got a bunch of young people as well as people of all different age bands. I tell young people, you have to figure out when is youth to your advantage and when is it to your disadvantage. And when it's to your disadvantage, figure out the strategies to help dampen that down. You can't get rid of it, right? Because the person sees you're young, right? If you have a baby boomer kind of age group buyer, right? They know you're young. They can see it. They can see it on your LinkedIn profile. They can see it right in front of them in a meeting, whether it's Zoom or in person. You have to learn the strategies about how to leverage when youth is a strength and how to manage when youth is a disadvantage.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Sure.
What do you put some meat on those bones?
Yeah. So I think where youth is an advantage is passion, energy, drive, resiliency. This idea of, and I don't buy for a moment, the stuff about that Gen Zers or millennials are, self-absorbed and stuff like that. Not at all. I think they're great generations. I'm really, really a big fan. I think that people my age, that 50s, 60s who are buyers care about seeing people who are passionate about what they do and who are driven to do the right thing and not pretending to be something they're not. And being okay with saying, I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to get one of my partners to do that. So I think that energy that you bring as a young sales professional, and if you're doing the right things by becoming educated and sharing that insight and being curious, intellectually curious, I think so many buyers today, of course, I know they're busy and, people don't have time just to sit around and have idle conversations, but actually, I believe they enjoy helping younger people succeed. And you want to run away from the people who don't want to see younger people succeed. They're not great clients to go get anyway. But then when it could be to your disadvantage, right? If there's a knowledge gap, there's an expertise gap, and you have to recognize that you can't fake it until you can make it. That's not a strategy. Not in my business where the mistakes get very costly into the millions and millions of dollars. So it's being humble about where you are on your journey, your career journey, and not being afraid to lean into that and seek help from people who are more mature in the business, have more gravitas in the business. Those would be the biggest things, right?
Yeah. Makes sense. That's obviously working with college students. That's something that always comes up. I'm going to this industry. Everybody's as old as my parents or older, and how am I going to navigate this? And the answer is they've all sort of been there at some point. You don't overstate, you don't overpromise and underdeliver. You're probably going to have to work harder than you want to. You're gonna because you don't know. There's so much that you don't know, so you go figure it out. We're going to stop it right there for now. Please dive into the next episode of the Sales Lab to hear the conclusion of this interview. And by the way, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and to rate this podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.